Hello, my name is Darsha Narvaez, and I'm honored to be with you today. I'm speaking from the land of the Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi in Indiana. And I'm also speaking in gratitude for my ancestors who come from multiple strains around the world in my Puerto Rican heritage and also in my German American heritage. My talk today is titled Beyond Trauma-Informed, Returning to Indigenous Wellness-Informed Practices. Trauma-informed practice today is becoming quite important across many fields and domains. But it's important to also have a wellness-informed understanding so that we can prevent the trauma in the first place. First, my puzzlement since I was a young child was what happened to humanity. And today we can see we are in a big, big mess in the United States, which tends to export its ways to the world. Human well-being is on the decline and has been for some time, with lots of mental illness, violence, suicide, drug addiction increasing, with everyone under age 55 at a health disadvantage compared to other advanced nations, with child and adult well-being ranking near the bottom in international comparisons of advanced nations. At the same time, we are destroying our habitat, our Earth, the Earth, although this is not all human beings. Earth systems are breaking down, as you know. There's massive ecological disruption from human activity, wildlife decreasing, and massive poisoning of soil, air, water in our bodies. And we have climate instability to such an extent now that we are in a climate emergency. We have been around, our species, for 2 to 6 million years, depending on how you count it. And it's only the last 5,000 years, less than 1% of our existence on the planet, that we have become so incredibly destructive. What have we forgotten? So I'm going to talk about today our species wellness-informed pathway. Where do we find that pathway? Well, we can look at the 95% of human history, which was spent in Earthcentric societies, represented by small band hunter-gatherers, foragers who have few possessions. They're still in existence worldwide, independent from one another. And they practice immediate return instead of investing in cultivation, domestication, or resource accumulation. The San Bushmen of Southern Africa have been in existence for at least 150,000 years, and we share genes from them. These cultures exhibit a different kind of mind, which Sorensen called a pre-conquest mind. They're nature literate as well, and highly ecologically attached with deep place-based knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge of the natural world. They show us our wellness-informed pathway, and I'm going to talk about 4 pieces of that. One is that it meets humanity's basic needs. The meeting of these basic needs leads to thriving. It develops heart-mindedness, and it supports an earth-centered living know-how. So first, what are our basic needs? Well, we have animal needs for nourishment, warmth, protection, and safety, and feeling at home in the locale where we are on the earth. Mammalian needs are for affection and play and inclusion. We are also social mammals, and so we need extensive bonding, community support, and social enjoyment. And then we, of course, are uniquely human, and our needs as human beings are for intersubjectivity with multiple adults, immersion in communal life, apprenticeship in adult activities, making meaning of our existence, and the ability to expand the self and heal our relationships and ourselves when needed. What does human thriving look like? What do we see in these societies? Well, we see that individuals have quiet minds. They have inner happiness and exhibit childlike glee. They're very vital and energetic, fully alive, have high autonomy, and are honest. They have a deep sense of humor, silly humor. outstanding memory and senses. They build habits at will. They have know-how, of course, for getting along in their particular landscape. They have ecological attachment, a relational respect for nature. They're connected to spirit, have a reality, a sense of reality beyond what you can see, beyond the manifest or feel. They also thrive in relationship, and they enjoy being with others and enhance the well-being of others, just as a matter of course. They're relationally attuned then and responsive, give empathy, receive empathy, are immersed in unconditional listening to one another, are communally oriented. So this is to go along with the autonomy as well. They're authentically helpful, unconditionally loving and forgiving, exhibit great generosity and sharing. It's practiced and expected. They're egalitarian. No one coerces anyone, no matter what age. And they respect their ancestors and future generations, keeping them in mind, along with the rest of the living world, feeling responsible for it. What then do I mean by heart-centeredness that these peoples exhibit? We call it an ethical mindset, mindsets that are peaceable. One is the face-to-face mindset of relational engagement, this flexible relational attunement, where you exhibit full presence in the moment, the kinds of interpersonal characteristics that I was just talking about, including intersubjectivity and resonance with the other, and egalitarian regard, a sense of reverence for the other, an I-thou experience, honoring the dignity of the other being, whether human or not human. A small ego is characteristic as well, and these are all, these characteristics are primed then by supportive, caring relationships and environments, which I'll talk about in a moment, that develop secure attachment through a companionship lifestyle. The communal imagination is the mindset that includes abstract thinking, your ability to think outside the present moment. And in this kind of imagination, you have an egalitarian respect and feel a resonant responsibility, take sympathetic action or anticipate it, imagine it, and you have then your personal agency flows together with your sense of communion with others. These mindsets, these orientations, this heart-centeredness is co-constructed postnatally after birth. So we are prepared, we're innately prepared for these, but you need to have a supportive environment afterwards, after birth, or after conception, actually. And then wellness 4, the last piece of my 4-part wellness focus here is earth-centered living know-how. And that attitude that know-how is guided by an attitude that Leopold exhibited. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. So our path to wellness then, these 4 characteristics, follows what I call the cycle of cooperative companionship. So number 1, we have companionship care from conception, the honoring of our basic needs, the fostering of thriving. It then leads to 2, the healthy psychosocial neurobiology that leads to an adult who has well-being and exhibits wisdom. And these adults then create communities that continue the cycle, attending to the basic needs of the community. And our lab looks at what that companionship care is and what effects it has on child well-being and adult well-being, their sociality, and their morality. The evolved nest is what we call that early life companionship care. It also is characteristic of what the lifestyle of a companionship, cooperative, native, indigenous community practices. Everyone experiences the evolved nest. So all these characteristics, except after birth and breastfeeding, are continuous throughout life. So I'll first say that these are a set of social and ecological circumstances that are typically inherited by members of a given species. So all animals have an evolved nest. and for us and for other animals, it's one of many inheritances beyond genes. We inherit culture, we inherit epigenetic plasticity, etc. And our characteristics, because we're social mammals, are mostly over 75 million years old, because that's when these kinds of practices emerged. So in effect, evolution has done the experiments. And they then are a set of original instructions for raising a human being well, to raise our human nature. And it must be pointed out that these are not provisioned only by a mother, they are provisioned by a community. Why are they important? Because human babies resemble fetuses, particularly for us. The nest is vital because humans resemble fetuses till about 18 months of age, and they grow their brains rapidly in the first 5 years of life, and particularly in those first few years. And so their needs need to be met quickly for the optimal arousal of the body and brain as it grows rapidly. You don't want to stress a baby, because then you're creating the wrong biochemical field for actually impairs growth, inhibits growth, or grows the wrong things. So each of these practices are, now we know, not only are they 75 million years old, not only are they practiced all over the world by small band hunter-gatherers and even other traditional societies, but now we know we have the neuroscience to back each of them up and how important they are for brain development, for social development, and my area, moral development as well. There's soothing perinatal experiences, so that means a relaxed gestational experience, relaxed pregnancy, at least not socially stressed. And then birth is welcoming and soothing, and postnatal experiences are with the mother and no painful procedures. That means no infant circumcision, no separation of mother and child, etc. And on request breastfeeding. Every animal has a unique kind of milk. Ours is thin, needs to be ingested frequently, usually 20 minutes, every 20 minutes or so, because the stomach is so small of the child at birth, and also because our milk has all sorts of building blocks for growing a healthy body and a healthy immune system. Our species' normal breastfeeding length and weaning age is 4 years old, which blows the mind, of course, but that's because the immune system takes at least that long to develop to adult levels. Then there's positive moving touch. That means carrying and in arms most of the time as a baby, and frequently as a young child, and then lots of touch throughout life, and no negative touch. We have longitudinal evidence now showing that spanking is like physical abuse now, and has long-term poor effects on the outcomes for the child and adult. Positive climate is a welcoming climate where the child feels like they belong and that they have a positive impact on others. Self-directed social play builds the brain in all sorts of ways, including control of aggression, executive functions. All sorts of genes are expressed during play, helps the brain grow properly. Allo mothers, other mothers, these are required for providing all these things to babies who need 24/7 care. Usually it's grandmothers, often fathers and others in the community, even non-kin. Responsive relationships then involve the people caring for the child are there with you. They're not in the way I described, an interpersonal connection and attunement. Nature connection is vital, feeling, being immersed first in natural world and then feeling connected to it. And then healing practices, because humans make mistakes and we get unbalanced and we feel unwell, and we need to have community healing experiences as well as individual healing. So the early life experience builds the body, brain, mind of the child. And there's a constant interaction between nature and nurture. You cannot separate them because the baby's a different baby 5 minutes later. So epigenetic things are happening all along the way, and our systems are quite plastic, less so with age. And our biology is really constructed by our social experience, and that biology then affects how we are as a social being. Caregivers then are co-constructing our emotions and cognitions. They're intertwined. They build our implicit self and our social worldview. Every baby then needs a womb with a view. This is Montagu's term, exterogestation, because of that 18 months of being like a fetus. One of the key effects of nestedness in the early years is right hemisphere development. It dominates development over the left hemisphere in those first several years of life. And the right hemisphere helps us self-regulate. So the vagus nerve is one of those features that's linked to all the major systems of the body. And it gets established then, well or not, in early life based on how nested you are. And there's other aspects of who we are that are really right hemisphere dominated, that are linked to our ability to be well and to be social and to be moral in that open-hearted way. Emotional intelligence is here, empathy, our sense of being, our sense of relationships, our self-transcendence, higher consciousness, our receptive intelligence to the signals of others, including the other than human. Right hemisphere, though, can develop throughout life, and it can develop from play and other face-to-face, in-the-moment experiences that keep you there and keep it growing. One of the key differences among these societies, original societies, our small band hunter-gatherers, is they have this dynamic flow state. They spend most of their time in this state, which enables them to take multiple perspectives and be transpersonal. They have the ability to merge with multiple others and move in and out of who they are. They de-differentiate, finding oneness with others rather than difference and separation. This is the right hemisphere capacity. And they have a very full now. They focus on the present moment, which is heavy with connection to others, including the other than human, the trees, the rivers, the mountains, the animals, and also to ancestors and other spiritual aspects of a dynamic, fluctuating universe. And these capacities apparently are linked to the different worldview that you find among these societies and many traditional societies around the world. Robert Redfield identified two worldviews, one that is unified, sacred, and moral. And that's the left side there, the Indigenous viewpoints, which is our baseline, where you have a sense that spirit pervades everything. The world is animate, sentient, you're mutually related with everything at every moment, that humans are the younger siblings, that all these other creatures, entities have more wisdom than you, and you have things to learn from them, the river, the mountains, the trees, that you feel connected to everything, you feel placeful, at home on the earth, you fit in with the local landscape and bio-community, and you share respectfully with all the others in the bio-community. Since at least the 17th century, the other worldview has become dominant, and we can see it's got roots in the civilization with the Sumer and others 5,000 years ago or so. This worldview considers the cosmos to be fragmented, disenchanted, and amoral. In this case, only humans have spirit. Only humans matter, and humans are the pinnacle, whether you believe in creation or evolution. And the characteristics here are disconnection, to feel isolated, separated, sense of restlessness, and not feeling at home on the earth in this place where you are. And you then rely on your abstract ideals, abstractions, and you want them to conform everything to what you have in your mind, including the landscape. And there's lots of hoarding then instead of sharing. So I'm telling you a new story here. I will, or I am, and I will later too with the film. The stories that we hear and we tell really matter because they're going to influence then our attention and values and support for particular practices. And you can see then that our stories about what the community should be like, what humans are like, are going to affect number one there, that companionship care. We're going to provide that. And then the whole cycle is affected by the stories we tell. David Corton has a recent book out saying that we are living in a story, dominant story of sacred money and markets. And that's why we're destroying the planet. And we need to move back to the sacred and life and living earth story. So what has happened to our story? Well, culture has trumped biology and evolution. Ian Suttie suggested in the United States, we have a taboo on tenderness. And Dan Stern then has written this insightful comment. He says, although the overriding need of an infant and child for love and security is now well known, there are some who protest against it. And in the box here is what I hear routinely in the United States. Why should an infant make such demands? Why can't he be satisfied with less care and attention? How can we arrange things so that parents have an easier time? Minimization of what the baby needs, minimization of basic needs. In the meanwhile, he says, we should be wise to respect the baby's needs and to realize that to deny them is often to generate in the baby powerful forces of libidinal, that means affectionate attachment, libidinal demand and propensity to hatred, which can later cause great difficulties for both him and us. And I think in the United States, you can see what's happened because we have essentially traumatized children and adults for so long now. It's coming back to bite us. So we have moved away from societies and from communities that provide care that looks more like this, lots of touching and holding and caring and being with, to societies that, or in the United States, I should just say, stick to the US, in a society that whose childhood looks more like this, lots of isolation, loneliness, lack of touch, and ignoring, essentially. So what we've entered now is a cycle then of competitive detachment. We have extreme social poverty all along the way throughout life and pervasive suffering. So there's undercare in early life, developmentally inappropriate child raising, which leads to dysregulated psychosocial neurobiology, which then leads to adults with ill-being, limited socio-moral capacities, and then the culture becomes trauma-inducing. The adults are distracted, overwhelmed, neglectful, or over-controlling because they themselves were undercared for. And so we have a degraded nest. What happens with the degraded nest? Well, we know people get dysregulated in multiple systems. It seeds ill health of all kinds, mental, physical, social, moral, and a deep sense of disconnection from self, others, community, and from nature. Psychophysiologically, when an infant's needs are ignored, this is what's going to happen. There'll be a malformation of the stress response, the immune system, the endocrine system, neurotransmitters, fewer number, not functioning as well. Emotions and emotion systems will be developed, and the corpus callosum that unites the two halves of the brain will be thinner. So these gaps and lesions can appear in brain systems. You may not notice till adolescence or adulthood that something's wrong, because the brain adapts initially from just like a house that's being built on a poor foundation. You may not notice it until the storm comes or until you get to the top floor, and then things start to creak and fall apart. It's similar for us. Psychologically, what happens? Well, you distrust yourself, you distrust your own body, you're left to cry, nobody cares, I must be bad, is how the child interprets that, and interprets it as a bad self. And so we have an impaired sense of self. You learn to live against instead of with others because they haven't been living with you and honoring you and giving you empathy. And you become more socially disagreeable, more irritable, more oppositional, withdrawing, more distrustful of others, and which leads to various forms of anxiety, cynicism, and the demonization of others. You can see this happening across the United States. And what, instead of having that relational attunement, the engagement of towards the other that I was describing earlier, and the imagination to go with that, these are the things that are going to control you because you've been conditioned towards fight, flight, freeze, or faint, because your stress response has been conditioned because you're left in distress. So you'll be more oppositional, defensively, reactive aggression. You'll externalize and blame others more. You'll be socially withdrawn, possibly depending on when the insults happened, when the trauma occurred, and then you blame yourself, or you might flip between those, depending on the situation. And then you can also be dissociated, which also is common among sexually abused children, where you just go, you become numb and you freeze and you disappear and you are easily drawn into addiction, and you have, your heart is missing, essentially. So what we have then here is a description of what happens from the bottom up. Look at the bottom of the image. When we come into any situation, we immediately are going to feel either safe or unsafe. So that's neuroception. And once that happens subliminally, very quickly, we'll go into one side or the other. If we feel safe, we go over to the left side and we approach and we feel rewarded and we're just relaxed and we're open to life. If we feel unsafe, we're going to go into the right side and we're going to mobilize for fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And we'll feel paranoid because we will have experienced this before, and we brace ourselves against life. And what happens now with all these undercared for individuals is they're going to spend more of their time, more of their life on the right side of this diagram. And trauma-informed practices actually understand these patterns. You don't want to trigger people, right? So be careful how you say things, be careful how you treat people, etc., because you know there's trauma in the background of the person. But wellness-informed practices are going to orient also to the left side of the diagram. All the things I've talked about, the wellness-informed pathway, are going to help us develop this openness to one another and to life. What happens also on that right side, when we're been raised with undercare and trauma, is we're susceptible to WETIKO. It's a psychic virus that the Native Americans identified a long time ago. It's sort of like gold fever. And Jack Forbes wrote about this in his book. For several thousands of years, human beings have suffered from a plague, a disease worse than leprosy, a sickness worse than malaria, a malady much more terrible than smallpox, the disease of aggression against other living things, and more precisely, the disease of the consuming of other creatures' lives and possessions. So it's a cannibalism, he calls it. And this is what you can see that United States, I would say, has become rather ruthless and insatiable in its consumption of others in multiple ways. And these ghost theories are haunting us. This is British Empire, which planted these theories all over the world. They push us to WETIKO, to cannibalism, because we think we're more important, we're superior, white supremacy, that individualism, that everyone's disconnected and you have to fight to get what you need. Dog eat dog out there. Anthropocentrism, everything else is dead, you know, it's just us humans here. Intellectualism, you know, in your head, go in your ivory tower way of thinking, not in your heart center. Hierarchicalism, that's all we can do, you know, that's the way it is. The wealthy should have more because they worked harder, or whatever it is. Coercion, got to keep the system in place. You got to, you know, force children to do what you want them to do, to obey and not bother you. And capitalism, that economic wealth should be a first priority, and we should honor the capitalists for making lots of money. And so we use instead these protectionist imagination mindsets. Instead of having a communal orientation that's inclusive of the natural world, of everyone, all humans, and the heart-centeredness, we fall into these ways of being because we've been, our brains conditioned to be self-protective, to see threat. And so we will then move into wanting to control others, a vicious imagination. Dolores Umbridge from the Harry Potter film was very good at this, right? Torturing children for their own good. It's that kind of dominance seeking, very unegalitarian, scapegoating, imposing altruism of sorts too. And then we also, what we do with kids in the United States and elsewhere, is we put them in schooling where they learn to detach from their feelings, from their hearts, from their intuition development, from looking out the window and connecting to the birds or the trees, right? We want them to be in the school, learning this information and taking a test. And so they learn to go into their intellect. which is a lack of attuned relationship. It's emotionally cool or cold. It categorizes and stereotypes, objectifies, dissects, decontextualizes, seeks control or power over things, seeks a firm answer, differentiates everything, calculates utility, and innovates without a sense of consequence. And we have a lot of the destruction of the world has come from these detached imaginations. And we've inherited then these attitudes towards the earth, kind of treating the other than human world as dead, and resources inferior to us. And that's a WETIKO attitude. Our education systems are then supporting an anti-life agenda. And one of the characteristic then mindset or orientation in civilized communities, and I'll just stick to the United States, is this linear logical thinking as superior that relies on differentiation, as I was just talking about, right? The detached imagination that reality is really only one thing. It's not pluralistic. There's no sense of multi-perspective taking. It's hierarchical, and we get obsessed with order and precision and prediction. This is all left brain dominant stuff. And you can see the experiments, and when you numb one side of the brain or the other, you can see what the brain halves prefer. And hierarchically arranged societies then are made up of separate bits, and you have to contest to get to the top of the pyramid, and that's the way the world works. And then there's this differentiation. There's not a sense of oneness and connection and communion. Instead, you have isolation and disconnection, and so it leads to deep anxiety and death terror. In conclusion, our species has gotten off the wellness-informed pathway, but the indigenous practices and worldview can get us back on track. Well-being is fostered from the bottom up in early childhood. Cultural practices and stories influence well-being top down by the narratives we attend to. We can change. We can change our baselines for what is species normal in terms of child raising, in terms of what we understand basic needs to be, in terms of what thriving looks like and what to aim for. We can change in terms of practices to provide the evolved nest, not only for young children, but that's the most important time, but throughout life, to understand that we thrive and maintain our human nature by nestedness. And that will keep us earth-centered, where the earth, the well-being of the earth is part of our sense of responsibility. We can change our mindsets and move towards heart-mindedness. Virtually all societies of the world have emphasized heart-mindedness as central to being a human being. It's only in the last few hundred years that, and then recently, the dominant culture has dismissed all that. And we can also change our perceptions and emphasize oneness and use practices to improve our sense of connection to others. We have Four Arrows and I have a book coming out next spring where we encourage people to take up this, what we call kinship worldview, this indigenous worldview. We have multiple precepts from that worldview that we discuss in the book. And what we want to go to, what we want to reach, is this kind of higher consciousness that Colin Turnbull noted in the Mbuti, an awareness of spirit that enables one to accept differences of manner, customs, speech, behavior, even of belief, while still feeling an underlying unity. It's an awareness of spirit that enables one to avoid the conflict and hostility that arise so easily from such differences. May we all move in that direction. I have 2 more slides here. I'd like to give thanks first to the Family Life Project, Mary Tarsha, in the Evolutionary Moral Psychology Lab. There's lots of information you can find here. I have a blog at Psychology Today. My webpage has all sorts of things you can download. And evolvednest.org is where this is a lot of information on the Evolved Nest for the public. And I'm going to show you this film now. The Breaking the Cycle film is a 6-minute film that summarizes in many ways what I've been saying. but gives it a real emotional punch. Let's see if this works. I have to stop share first for a moment. Sorry for this. We've been told a story that we are selfish, aggressive, rugged individuals. If that were true, we should have no problem with physical distancing and self-isolation. The pandemic showed us that this story is not who we are. That's because we evolved in cooperative bands of kin and non-kin, where we were nurtured and welcomed by all members of the community. We lived together, we gathered food together, we sang together, and we danced together. We knew it would have been impossible to survive on our own, but together we thrived. Today we are living in a culture that goes against everything it means to be human. Our culture emphasizes toughness over tenderness, isolation instead of togetherness, even for babies. As a result, we are depressed, anxious, chronically ill, and at the bottom of every international indicator for health. We are stuck in a cycle of competitive detachment where we feel disconnected from others and even ourselves, while at the same time feeling we have to compete for anything worthwhile. There's a way not only to break this cycle, but to create a new one that reclaims our humanity and helps us heal ourselves in our culture. We can create a cycle of connected, cooperative companionship. For most of our existence, we have created culture from the bottom up, from the way we raise children, and from the top down, from the stories we told one another. Children were nested in loving, supportive village care, growing deep connections to and respect for the natural world. In modern culture, children are raised with disconnection, with little concern for their basic needs, and with an almost random set of relational experiences. They still hear stories conveyed by various media. They are full of put-downs, egoism, and violence. Babies require an external womb experience to grow and connect with others. They need calming, affectionate care, immediate responses to keep them optimally aroused while rapidly growing brain connections. Without this early care, without meeting our millions-year-old biological needs for our evolved nest, babies learn a pattern of disconnection from the self, from others, and from the world, manifesting in self-protective mindsets and irritation with people from different backgrounds or with different ideas. We withdraw from social life because it's just too painful, triggering the traumas we experienced early on in life. We constantly seek to fill a void we were never biologically intended to experience. The good news is that it's possible to break this cycle of competitive detachment and restore the cycles of connected, cooperative companionship. We can learn what our basic needs are and find ways to help everyone get them met. We can take steps that open our minds and hearts and build empathy towards others who are different from us. We can become aware and careful about where we put our greatest asset, our attention. We can build attachment to the natural world by immersing ourselves in its beauty and developing our connection with its aliveness. Cultures can and do change. It begins with each one of us realizing our inherent nature to be empathic, flexible, and sovereign beings, followed by taking steps to heal and restore our core nature. Many of us assume that the culture we live in mirrors innate human nature, but today's dominant cultures of competitive, destructive detachment are rare and recent. Nearly every other culture that has ever existed during our species' history over millions of years has been one of connected, cooperative companionship. To heal ourselves and our world, we simply must return to this way of nurturing children and communities. For more information, go to breakingthecyclefilm.org. Thank you very much.